Hi guys, welcome back to my channel and welcome back to my Back to Basics series. I actually created this recipe last year and shared it on Instagram but never got the chance to record this recipe. I wanted to make it again just in time for the Jewish New Year, which is happening in just a few days, and traditionally things are flavoured with apple and honey, so I thought to incorporate that into a challah. It is quite similar to my last challah recipe that you may or may not have seen, but I've also become better at making challah because I basically made one every week in the last year, and so I may say a few things which should help you out even more. As always, we're going to start off by activating our yeast. This is really important because you want to make sure your yeast is actually working. So I've got some warm water here and I'm going to put the dry yeast straight in, along with a little bit of sugar. Now, yeast loves warmth and sugar, so this is the perfect environment to show that it's working. I'm going to give that a quick mix and leave it to the side for about 5 minutes. What you're looking for is it to start foaming, and I'll show you what that means when it's ready. While I'm waiting for the yeast to activate, I can start off with my dry ingredients in a large bowl. So I've got some flour here, and to make it more Rosh Hashana themed, I'm going to flavour this with cinnamon too. This is optional. I love the flavours of apple and cinnamon together. And a little bit of salt, which just enhances all the flavours. And mix that through until it's fully incorporated. So this is what you want to see when your yeast is ready to use. That thin layer of froth on the surface, which is a good sign. If that doesn't happen, it means your yeast is probably old, so it's always best to use as fresh yeast as possible. So now we can add our wet ingredients to the dry ingredients. So I've got some flavourless oil here, vegetable, canola, sunflower oil, anything will do, and some runny honey. So this will also add the honey flavour as well as the sweetness to the challah. And then I can go in with my yeast and water mix and start mixing with a spoon. So the reason why I like mixing with a spoon at first is because it's a little bit sticky to start doing it with your hands straight away. So I like to mix it until most of the wet is incorporated, and then I'll go in with my hands to form the dough. Sometimes it can seem a bit dry, but don't worry, this is a perfect amount, and the more you squish everything together, the dough eventually forms. And once it's formed, you can out-turn it on the surface and start the kneading process. So like most breads, this dough requires kneading to help develop the gluten. If you're doing this by mixer, you can use your dough hook for about 5 minutes, or by hand for about 10 minutes. And all I'm doing is using the heel of my hand and pushing the dough away from me and then collecting it back into a ball towards me, over and over again. Everyone's got their own kneading techniques, to be honest. This is mine. So after about 7 to 10 minutes, your dough should be really nice and smooth and springs back to the touch like this. If it's not quite springing back, it means it needs working more. But this is ready to leave to prove. So I'm going to put the dough back into the bowl, which is now clean, and leave it covered with a tea towel in a warm place for about an hour until it's doubled in size. While the dough is proving, it's a good time to get on with my apple filling. I've got 2 large apples here, which I'm going to peel and dice up really fine. So this apple is going inside our challah. So even though it's tempting to have quite large chunks in there, you want the pieces quite small because they're going to be rolled up in each strand of challah. So I'm dicing them up quite small and putting them into a bowl. And into the apple, I'm going to add about 2 tablespoons of dark brown sugar and a little bit of vanilla, and mix that through. I'm also going to add a little bit of cinnamon here, about a teaspoon. Again, totally optional. And it may seem dry at first, but what will happen now is I'm going to leave this to the side a bit for about half an hour, and the juices of the apples will start releasing, and it's going to create this amazing sort of syrup. So once the sugar and cinnamon is fully mixed in, I'm going to leave the bowl to the side and have a look at my dough. So it's been about an hour and you can see that it has doubled in size, and now is the most satisfying part of bread making, is the punch down. So you're quite literally punching down dough here. What you're doing is you're knocking out those big air bubbles that have just been created from the proof, because you don't want any of those big air bubbles within the dough. I'm putting the dough out onto the surface and giving it an extra knock down before bringing it back into a ball and divide it up ready to roll. So I'm going to be doing a 4th strand here. Because of the filling of apple, you're quite limited in choices when it comes to shaping this sort of challah. And also I'm going to do a nice feature in the middle, which you'll see in a moment. As always, I'm going to weigh out my dough so I can divide it equally. So I believe this dough came to just over 900 grams. So each piece was about 230 grams. Once again, this is for a 4 strand. Of course, if you wanted a 5 strand or a 3 strand, then you'll want to divide the total weight of the dough by however many strands you want. And just before rolling them out, I actually like rolling them into a ball. So just to show you what my apple mix looks like, you can see that it almost looks a little bit wetter. So the juices have released and there's this lovely syrup that's collected at the bottom of the bowl, which will help flavor the apples and keep them nice and moist too. So now it's time to roll out each strand. So I actually roll out my strands in a similar way to this anyway, even without the filling, because you don't get any tear marks. However, it can be a little fiddlier. So I'm going to start just by making a very vague sausage shape and then get a rolling pin. Now this is my super cute mini rolling pin. You can of course use a normal sized one. And I'm going to roll it out lengthways and get it as thin as possible. I want to make sure the width is even, so I am going to roll it widthways as well. And when it's thin and long, I can now put in some of my apple filling. Now, you can see that I did actually get some of the syrup here. You don't really want the syrup because it's going to make the dough quite sticky. I'm going to use the syrup later on, so if you can, just try and get the apples on. And now I'm going to encase them in the strand. So using the nearest edge to the apples, I'm going to fold the dough over and pinch it down so they're snug in there. And then roll the rest of the strand over it. So the apples are tucked up nicely in the dough. Now you can see where I've actually got some syrup in there. It opened the dough slightly because the syrup is wet. But I'm just going to go along the seam and pinch it so it's completely secure inside. You can try and give it a little roll, but it may not work so well because obviously you've got the filling in there. But you want to do the exact same thing to the other 3 strands. Any sticky syrup that ended up on the surface, make sure you wipe it away before you roll out your dough because otherwise your dough will stick to the surface. So 4 strands done. They're all pretty equal in size and length. And now it's time to braid the challah. But this isn't going to be a traditional way of braiding. I'm actually going to leave a hole in the middle to put a honey dipping sauce. Because once again, it's traditional on Jewish New Year to not only dip apple in honey, but also to dip your challah in honey for a sweet new year. So I've got an oven-proof ramekin in the middle, and that's going to be my center. I'm going to take one of the strands and face the seam downwards so the smooth side is facing up, and will ensure that the seam stays closed during the cooking. I'm then going to take another strand and put it directly opposite the one that's already on the tray. Then I'm going to take my 3rd strand and place it long ways. So it's resting over one and then I'm going to tuck it under one. So at one crossover, that strand is going under the other piece of dough and on the other one it's going over. And the final strand will do the exact same thing but in the opposite way. So it's alternate all the way around. And now I'm going to neaten off the shape by twisting the end bits of the strands. So the strand on the right has gone underneath the previous dough, which means it needs to go over the next one because it's always alternate. So I'm going to twist it over and then tuck it underneath. And we'll do that with all the remaining strands around the whole challah. Now once again, these strands are a lot thicker than they should be because of the apple filling, so this is a little bit more fiddly than usual, but it's really important to tuck the end pieces underneath. That's how you keep them closed while it's cooking. And then I'm just going to go round one more time to really make sure those ends are completely tucked under the challah. The idea is that this is going to prove and then bake in this shape around the ramekin in the middle. So it needs one more prove before cooking. So someone once told me it's actually a good technique to put cling film before the tea towel on its second prove. I'm not sure why, but it keeps things cozy in there and also helps keep the shape of the challah too. So I've got a layer of cling film and we'll leave it to prove for another half an hour. So the dough is proofed once again, remove the tea towel and cling film, and now it's time to egg wash. Now, I do not hold back with my egg wash. I think it really helps get a darker crust on the challah and that shine as well. So a nice generous covering over the whole challah, avoiding the middle ramekin because it will make the challah stick to it and we want it to be removable after the baking. And this is now going to bake at 190 degrees Celsius. So in my last video, I say that I bake it on 180, but I actually think a higher temperature helps with the darker crust. So 190 degrees Celsius on a fan oven for about 30 minutes until it's completely cooked through. And once it's cooked, oh my gosh, it doesn't just look amazing, the smell is just incredible, particularly from that cinnamon that's inside. And while it's still hot, I'm actually going to get that syrup that's left over from the apples and spread it all over the challah. And this just adds this element of sweetness and flavor. You really don't have to do this because you've obviously got the flavor inside, but this makes this like sticky glaze, which is just so addictive and delicious. And now it's important to leave the challah to completely cool, especially if you're about to handle the ramekin in the middle, because that's going to be extremely hot. But once it is cool, you can easily out-tan it, and you can see the challah has baked in a ring. I'm going to give that ramekin a clean before I put it in again, and before I do that, I'm going to transfer the challah onto my serving plate. Because it's quite a fragile ring of challah, I'm going to fold the paper underneath to release it, rather than pick the whole challah up because I'm scared it's going to break. And now I can put the clean ramekin straight into the middle and it fits perfectly. And now I can fill it with the runny honey, but this is a great technique to do with any filling. It doesn't have to be honey, it could be hummus or tahina or just olive oil with balsamic. This shape is really versatile for any time of year. So just for presentation purposes, I've decided to cut up some apple on the side and decorate it with some rosemary just for some greenery, because like I said, it's traditional to dip apple and the challah in the honey in the middle. And just wait till you see inside. So I'm going to tear off a nice big chunk here and reveal that hidden apple filling. It is so soft and full of flavor. Like I said, the smell was absolutely incredible and I just couldn't wait to dig in. The great thing about this challah is that even though we've added things like sugar and honey, it's not that sweet. So you can still dip it in the honey without such a sweet overload. I cannot recommend this recipe enough. Every time I make it or give it to someone, they are just blown away. They've never tasted a challah quite like this. So of course, if you do try it out, don't forget to tag me at George's Cakes on Instagram. If you are celebrating, have a wonderful new year and see you soon for more tutorials.